kidnapped brothers paraded around as aliens, an elephant hanged in front of a cheering mob, a man torn apart by lions, and more. These are dark historical facts about the circus. The Ringling Brothers and Burnham and Bailey Circus wasn't just any circus. By the 1940s, it was the biggest traveling show in America, often called the greatest show on Earth. They had hundreds of performers, dozens of trains, nearly 50 elephants that were basically stars of the show. In November 1941, right near the end of their nationwide tour, something very dark went down, and it wasn't a performance stunt or an accident. The circus's herd of elephants, nearly 50 of them, were out grazing after setting up in Atlanta when one of the older females suddenly collapsed and gasped for breath. Over the next 5 days, at least 10 elephants died, and another died a few days later in Augusta. Autopsies confirmed arsenic poisoning as the cause. Ringling's management immediately brought in detectives to trace the poison back along the tour route through Virginia, Charlotte, and South Carolina, checking feed, grass, and every drugstore in town for clues, but nothing added up. Was it something in the grass? Well, the vets didn't think ordinary insecticide exposure could kill that many elephants so quickly, so investigators eventually suspected it might have been an inside job. Someone attached to the show may have deliberately poisoned the animals, but if so, then who and why? Well, no charges were ever filed. The case was eventually dropped. To this day, the outbreak remains a mystery. In 1899, a bounty hunter working for the circus spotted two young African-American brothers, George and Willie Muse, working in a tobacco field in Truvine, Virginia. The boys were albino, which gave them, of course, pale skin, white hair, and blue eyes. The scout saw dollar signs and decided they'd be great in the circus. So, did he offer them a job? No. He literally just kidnapped them. They were told their mother was dead, and for the next 28 years, they were exploited in the circus. They were never paid a cent. Their quote-unquote managers changed their names constantly, billing them as Echo and Iko, the ambassadors from Mars, and sheep-headed men, because of the way their hair was styled in dreadlocks. They were moved between the Al G. Barnes Circus and Ringling Brothers, performing for massive crowds, while their mother, Harriet Muse, never stopped looking for them. In 1927, the circus finally returned to Roanoke, Virginia. Harriet found her way to the circus grounds, and despite the threats from circus guards, she stood her ground until her sons recognized her. It was a rare case where the law actually stepped in. Harriet sued the circus and won a settlement. Absolutely insane case. In September 1916, a drifter named Walter Eldridge was hired by the Sparks World famous show's Circus as an assistant elephant trainer. He had no experience. During a show in Kingsport, Tennessee, Eldridge was riding Mary, a 5-ton Asian elephant. According to witnesses, Mary spotted a piece of watermelon on the ground and leaned down to get it. Eldridge reportedly poked her behind the ear with a sharp bullhook to get her back in line. That's when Mary snapped and threw him to the ground before stepping on his head in front of the whole audience. What do they say? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes? Seems apt in this situation, but the town didn't see it that way. They went into a frenzy. A local blacksmith tried to shoot Mary, but couldn't penetrate her thick skin. The crowd started chanting, "Kill the elephant." The circus owner, Charlie Sparks, realized he was going to lose his business if he didn't comply, so he decided on a public execution to appease the mob. The next day, Mary was transported by rail to Irwin, Tennessee, where a 100-ton industrial crane used for moving train boilers was waiting. I don't want to go into detail, but she ended up hanging there for 30 minutes while thousands of people watched. It was, without a doubt, one of the grimmest examples of animal cruelty in American entertainment history. Before the circus became a sterilized, family-friendly event, it was a rough operation that often attracted trouble. In 1953, the Raymond and Company and Van Amberg's Menagerie rolled into Somerset, Ohio. At the time, circus workers were notoriously tough, essentially a traveling gang of performers who were very used to defending their territory. Well, after the show, a dispute broke out between the circus canvasmen, that's the crew who set up the tents, and a group of local townspeople. It started as a small scuffle, but it quickly escalated into a full-scale riot, which became known as the Hippodrome War. The circus crew used their heavy tent stakes and hammers, whatever they could find, as weapons, while the locals showed up with firearms and pitchforks. This was not a quick brawl. It went on for 2 whole days. By the time the dust settled, several people were dead and dozens more were seriously injured. Then the circus just packed up and moved to the next town before any real arrests could be made. I don't know how I've never heard of this case until today, but someone needs to make the movie. Back in the day, medical oddities were a big element of the circus and sideshow circuit. Well, in 1831, a Chinese laborer named Hu Lu arrived in London. He had a massive 56-pound tumor hanging from his abdomen that made it difficult for him to walk. He traveled to England hoping that Western surgeons could save his life, and what a mistake that was, because instead, doctors saw this as a golden opportunity for a public spectacle. Instead of a private sterile hospital room, the surgery was performed in front of a massive paying audience of nearly 700 people, including wealthy London businessmen who paid for seats the way you'd pay for a theater ticket. Some circus promoters were also there scouting the spectacle. There was no anesthesia in 1831, so Hulu was conscious and strapped to a chair. The surgeons were under immense pressure to kind of perform for the crowd, which led to a series of panicked mistakes. The surgery lasted nearly 2 hours as they just hacked away at the massive growth. Hulu fainted multiple times, and each time the surgeons poured wine down his throat to make him wake back up so they could continue the demonstration. He eventually died on the table from shock. To understand how dangerous the circus was, you have to realize that these shows were basically small cities on wheels. In 1918, the Hagenbeck Wallace Circus was one of the biggest names in the business, second only to the Ringling Brothers. They traveled on their own dedicated trains with dozens of wooden cars filled with performers, laborers, and animals. On June 22nd, while most of the troupe was asleep in their bunks, their train had to make an emergency stop near Hammond, Indiana, because of a mechanical issue. While behind them, on the same track, was an empty military troop train. The engineer of that second train, a guy named Alonzo Sargent, had fallen asleep at the throttle. He blew right through several warning signals and then just slammed into the back of the circus train at 35 miles per hour. Because the circus cars were made of old dry wood and lit by oil lamps, the entire rear of the train immediately ignited. 86 people were killed. Many of them burned beyond recognition in their sleep. And because the circus was such a show-must-go-on machine, they performed in the next town just days later, while many of their performers were being buried in a mass grave in Chicago. We usually think of P.T. Barnum as the harmless showman played by Hugh Jackman, but parts of his greatest show on earth built its fortune on something much more sinister: human trafficking under the guise of education. In the late 1800s, the circus wasn't just about acrobats. Barnum and his partners would hire scouts to go to Africa and Asia to find indigenous people. They would often kidnap them or trick them into very misleading contracts, then ship them to America to be put in cages. Yes, I'm talking about human zoos. This really was a thing. The circus would set up scenes where they'd be forced to act out primitive stereotypes for white audiences who paid a nickel to stand there and gawk at them. The circus would often market them as missing links in evolution, and they were often kept in horrific cold conditions that their bodies just weren't used to, which led to all sorts of diseases and early deaths. By the 90s, the circus was trying to modernize, but the way they handled large animals was mostly still stuck in the 19th century. Tyke was a 20-year-old African elephant performing with the Circus International in Honolulu. What the audience didn't know was that Tyke had a history of discipline issues, which in circus terms usually meant she'd been beaten into submission for years. Well, during a performance in front of thousands of families, Tyke finally reached her breaking point. She trampled her trainer to death and severely injured her groomer right in the middle of the ring. There's footage of this. Well, then she kicked her way out of the arena and ran into the downtown streets of Honolulu. For 30 minutes, she wandered through traffic in a total panic. Police eventually cornered her. They didn't have tranquilizers, so they just started firing their service weapons. The worst part is circus owners knew that she was dangerous. She'd attacked people twice before in previous years, but they kept her on the road because a performing elephant was too valuable of an asset for them. But hey, maybe elephants just shouldn't be kept in captivity like this. In the 1870s, the so-called Lion King was Thomas Massarti, who went by the stage name Massarti. He was a veteran performer with Manders's Menagerie, a massive traveling zoo and circus in England. Massarti was famous because he did his job with only one arm. He'd lost the other one to a lion years earlier. What's that I said earlier about playing stupid games? Well, this was one of them. On January 3rd, 1872, the circus was playing in Bolton. Massarti walked into a cage with 5 male lions. Some later said he'd been drinking heavily before the set. Well, one of the lions, a younger male, didn't follow a command and instead lunged at Massarti's legs. Then the other 4 lions immediately joined the attack. The crew tried to drive the lions off by poking them with hot iron rods and firing blank cartridges from pistols, but it only made the animals more frantic. The 500 people in the audience just sat there and watched in total shock and silence as Massarti was literally pulled apart. On July 6, 1944, the Ringling Brothers and Burnham and Bailey Circus pulled into Hartford, Connecticut. It was a hot afternoon, and about 7,000 people were packed inside the big top. During the performance, a small fire started on a side wall, and unfortunately, this tent was a death trap. See, to make it waterproof, the circus had coated the canvas in a mixture of wax and a highly flammable fuel. So when the flames hit that coating, the tent basically turned into a giant candle. Eyewitnesses described the fire racing up the walls and across the roof faster than a person could run. And as the wax melted, rained down on the crowd below. People rushed for the exits, but the circus had blocked some of them with animal cages to keep the performers moving, creating this massive bottleneck. In less than 10 minutes, the entire tent collapsed. 168 people died and hundreds more were permanently disfigured. Tragedy was so intense that several victims were just never identified. Well, I've always thought that joining the circus would be kind of a romantic idea. Not so sure about that now. With all that said though, I've been your host James. I will catch you, yes you specifically,